We need some additional enlightenment, Mr. Bill, and there's nobody better qualified to provide that enlightenment than you are.
Well, there's nobody better able to amplify it on it than you two are, but in thinking about the treasure forest, I guess my chest just swells with pride when I think of where we are today as compared to the effort that has gone into it. And I remember back when I came to Alabama as state forester in 1970, those times were marked by fierce infighting between environmentalists, wildlife folks, and forestry folks. Forestry being defined in those days as forest industry in the South, because that's predominance of where foresters were employed. And so when I came to Alabama, this was a fierce fight. And I was involved in it pretty early on, and then it got to where we, the forest industry, and the foresters were pretty well committed to the matter of reforesting the land, meaning planting more trees. Well, that was a legitimate exercise at the time because, you know, the country was built on the vast virgin forests that were here when the settlers came, and they used the forest and built houses and ran steamboats and ships and those kind of things, and they had a great time of cutting the forest and moving on. So it's called the cut out, get out days. And so when forestry was born, it was born because there were no trees. And our job as foresters was to reforest the land, and we did it with a vengeance. And one of the reasons it worked was that landowners are motivated by many things, but one of the things they're motivated by is finances, money. And so forest industry offered a market for their products over time, and so they became increasingly interested in planting trees as an investment. And so we began to work with landowners and foresters who wanted to provide wood to the mills, and landowners who wanted funds, you know, began to work together. And so it came along to where we could see only the trees in the forest. But then the environmental movement came, and the wildlife folk came, and they began to try to say, well, there's more to a forest than trees. And as a matter of fact, it got to be very, very controversial. And people got to where the environmentalists becoming so vocal that they were winning the war in the media. In other words, America was turning against forestry because the environmentalists were out there condemning our practices. I remember one time I went to Auburn University to a meeting that was sponsored by an environmental forum, Alabama Environmental Association or something like that. I can't remember the name of it, but I'm sure it's still around. But anyhow, I'm getting old. It's not that it's an unimportant name, but it's just that I can't remember names as well as I used to. But I went over there, and I do remember that Michael Frome, who was a writer for Field and Stream, was there, and his topic was to tear up the Forest Service. Everything they did, he was against. And so when it came my turn to speak, I got up there and defended forestry, and that went on. I mean, every time I went to a meeting, it was to defend forestry. And I had been brought up and educated to believe that this was a noble profession. We were reforesting the land. But I began to understand some of the things that they were talking about. You know, we were trying to advise landowners to grow trees sometimes to the detriment of the wildlife. And so we kept thinking. One time I was in the early 1970s, 72, something like that. I was invited to come down to New Orleans to address the Forest Farmers Association. My assigned topic was, how are we going to motivate landowners to practice forestry? And that definition by foresters at the time meant, how are we going to get them to grow more trees? But I took that as kind of a literal assignment to try to figure out how to motivate landowners to practice forestry. And so I interacted with several people before that meeting. I remember with the staff, I talked to them about it. And I got to thinking of multiple use forestry, because that kind of was what the landowners that I was associated with were doing. And so what we wanted them to go was to grow more trees, but then on the other hand, the landowners were just as concerned about environment and game and other values of the land as trees. And so Sid, what was his name? Sid McKnight of the U.S. Forest Service came by my office just prior to that meeting, and we were talking about all this, and we toying around what to call it. And so at that meeting with Sid and I, we came up with the name Treasure Forest: timber, recreation, environment, aesthetics, sustained, usable resource. And so I went down to New Orleans to a meeting, and I made the bold pronouncement, well, we're going to start a new program in Alabama called Treasure Forest. Little did I know of the problems that we would have in trying to start a program called Treasure Forest, because of the inertia of the forestry psyche at the time. Because, you know, we had a tree farm program, and it was working very well. The only problem being that landowners sometimes were marching into meetings and turning in their tree farm sign. And so when I made this presentation to the forest farmers, it was kind of a lukewarm reaction, because they were forestry by the traditional sense, generally speaking, you know, and forest industry was pretty predominant at such a meeting as that. And so I came back, and I saw the kind of lukewarm attitude, and came back, and I went and visited with our tree farm leaders in Alabama and said, listen, could we just redefine tree farm in Alabama a little bit and make it include recreation, environment, and aesthetics and some of those things? And they declined to do that because they had a good program that was working well in Alabama, and I could understand that in the context of the time. And so I said, well, let me see if the Forestry Commission, you know, would sponsor such a program. So I talked to my board, and they were foresters in the traditional sense, foresters and forest products folks. And they didn't jump up and down over such an idea either, you know. And so I talked to them a while, and it wasn't late. They didn't say no, but they said, no, we need to think about this a while. And so I went to the Southern Group of State Foresters, and I said to the Southern Group of State Foresters, we need a program such as I described, and we're going to call it Treasure Forest in Alabama. And they kind of were lukewarm on it. So I came back to Alabama, and I said, well, let me try the Alabama Forestry Planning Committee. Now, that was a organization made up of government, the heads of government agencies whose program impacted on private forest landowners. Soil Conservation Service, Extension Service, Forest Home, Farmers Home, and FHA, and some of those kind of SCS, some of those kind of programs. And the Forestry Planning Committee of Alabama jumped on it and said, this is a great thing. In fact, Charles Kelly was a member, who was the conservation head. And so they jumped on it and said, yes, we'll sponsor it. And so we named a committee of members of those agencies and organizations: Jerry Johnson, Jap Brown, Larkin Wade, Ray Coven of the Forest Commission, 2 or 3 others, who went off and really put together what Treasure Forest is and how landowners qualify and all those kind of things. And it really became an exercise in, forest landowners were there kind of before we were, you know. They are of such nature that they own the land, and they're concerned about all the elements of the land. And so it just became a matter kind of like Bob White, quail scatter, you know, when you shoot, and then they start calling and they get back together. So we started calling it, And these treasure forest owners started coming out to weed, you know, and coming together. And so it started from there, and it's going on to be a great thing.
Well, Mr. Bill, I think it was nothing short of a stroke of genius that you envisioned all of these various stakeholders that needed a common ground, so to speak, that they could launch out from in embracing the forest landowners of the state of Alabama. Since they had a vested interest in each and every forest parcel out there, there was something in the pie for everybody.
Absolutely.
And it seemed to have a propensity to bring out the very best in forest landowners and to recognize them for the contribution that they were making toward embracing this multifaceted use of all of our natural resources to enhance and maximize them to their fullest extent.
You know, Dan, and the thing is, forest landowners were the key from the beginning. As I told you, I was trying to define a program to describe those landowners who were good stewards of the land. And so the landowners, then we appointed an advisory committee. After the after the Forestry Planning Committee adopted the program, I appointed a committee, a Treasure Forest Landowner Advisory Committee. I was a state forester, and so I had me an advisory committee. And I remember us meeting over at the Madison, and we would talk about where we were trying to go and what we were trying to do and how we were going to get this word out to other forest landowners. And so there are a lot of times people give me a lot of credit for what happened, but as a matter of fact, in a vacuum, nothing would have happened because it took so many different components. The Forestry Planning Committee member agencies were very key and critical to the workings of it because they were committed to it. And we would get together and on a quarterly basis and talk about what we needed to do. The forest landowners were key to it, not just as an abstract concept, but because they were hands-on people involved in helping define it and helping move it forward. And they have never, I tell you this, I don't believe, now I may be wrong, and my recollection, my memory is not as good as it has been, but I don't believe I've ever seen a forest landowner that said, no, I'm not interested in such a mess as that. You know, I think it's just a matter of government. And by the way, Forestry Planning Committee was all government agencies. And my feeling at the time was that government needed to define good stewardship forestry so that landowners could feel good about what they were doing and feel they were contributing to the heritage of our state and nation and to the well-being of their generations to come. And so the Landowner Advisory Committee came and we interacted, and they were stimulating meetings, and they weren't hey boys or yes boys, you know. We had interactions in such fashion that it impacted on where we were going with that program because they knew, you know, I was just a bureaucrat. But as we interacted and defined and refined and moved on, I know Dan James was one of our original members and James Hughes was one of our original members, and then after a while, that committee evolved to where it became the board of directors of the Treasure Forest Landowners Association. And since that time, you all can talk more about what that organization has done than I can, because soon after it hired its permanent director, James Joe Malone, that was a great piece of work when that happened. But y'all can talk about that more than I can. But as I sit off and look at it, I think that it's one of the finest things that we've done, and also that Treasure Forest landowners are so committed to it, it's good for the heart, you know? Because, not only because I had a little bit to do with how it started, but because future generations, you know, one of the things in my dotage as I get older, Gary, I sit around and I wonder, well, what have I done while I was here that made a difference? You know, did I ever do anything that's going to make the world better? And so, and then I say, well, Treasure Forest. And I say, yep, I did. I had a part in a program that's going to make the world better. And when I'm gone, when I'm dead and gone, 500 years from now, the world's going to be better because Treasure Forest came into being. You know, we talk more about Alabama, but after a while, I think we need to talk about how it left Alabama and went to the rest of the nation.
The one question that I'd like to ask you, Bill, I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to meet Mr. Kelly Mosley. And we had an interview with him when I was working for James River and went on to Pineland. And I think Pineland was the first certified treasure forest. But a story that I've never heard was how you and Mr. Kelly Mosley got in cahoots and came up with some of the criteria for this certification.
Okay, well, it's kind of like two engines going down railroad tracks and coming to an intersection. We came to the intersection after Kelly Mosley was a committed treasure forest owner. He didn't know what to call it.
Just committed, huh?
And after I had defined what Kelly Mosley's strategy was, you know, and made this program work. He was working with Larkin Wade. Larkin Wade was his primary advisor. And so Larkin was an early advocate of this program because his philosophy was the same. He was working multiple-use forestry with Kelly Mosley over at Pineland. And so I never knew Kelly Mosley until after the Treasure Forest program was born. And he became certificate number one because Larkin Wade was key on the planning committee, and Larkin Wade knew of that property, and so he became the prime candidate because he was one of those people, one of those landowners I talked about who was a good steward before we ever gave a name to such a program.
So he kind of set the stage for, I guess, the criteria that you would base the certification on?
He didn't set the stage for me because I didn't know Kelly Mosley or what he was doing until after all this other stuff I've described had been put together. But he had a similar mindset. In other words, if he'd have thought of it, he could have defined his program and sold it to other landowners, and it would have been the Treasure Forest program. And so, like I say, he is a great American, a great steward of the land, and so it just happened that his management strategy was exactly what we were trying to define, and after we defined it, we found him. It's like the call going out to the quail, you know, and so we found him and he found us, and it went on from there. I think that first certification we certified 4 landowners, Kelly Mosley being number 1, and then 3 others. I don't remember their names, but from that point on, we have certified many landowners.
You mentioned the need, you saw the need to recognize people who were practicing good stewardship on their land. And one of the things that I'll never forget was the time that I won the Helene Mosley Treasure Forest Award. To me, it still is, to me, the most prestigious award that we have. I mean, I couldn't keep a button on my shirt whenever I saw that video come up, you know, and we won the state. And of course, as usual, I'm always trailing behind Dan James, you know. But the Helene Mosley Treasure Forest Award, which, like I said, to me is one of the most prestigious awards that you can give a landowner for good practice and good stewardship. Tell me a little bit something about that. How did you come up with such a fine...
I didn't come up with that. As a matter of fact, Kelly is a great benefactor of Auburn University. He's a great steward of the land. He's a great treasure forest owner, and when he gets committed to something, you know, not only has he got the courage of his convictions, he's got the financial wherewithal to go with that. And so he was a great benefactor of Auburn University, and he would give them a grant each year, and I think Larkin was involved in overseeing the dissemination of the funds from that grant. And so as time went on, Larkin worked with Kelly, and they devised this Helene Mosley. It was approved by the Forestry Planning Committee, and they devised the Helene Mosley Treasure Forest Award, and I think I'd have to agree with you. There is no award that means more to the well-being of Alabama than the Helene Mosley Treasure Forest. Is named after Kelly's first wife. Okay. But it is a really meaningful thing, and it was Kelly's way of contributing to the well-being of the program itself, the Treasure Forest program, and it's worked outstandingly well, I'd have to say.
Well, I do regret that I never had the opportunity to meet Mr. Mosley, but I was in a position to present a cohort of his, Mr. Buck Compton, with the Bill Moody Award, acknowledging his contribution.
Amen.
Oh, Buck was a good man. He was very much key to what went on at Pineland.
He still manages
Is that right?
He still manages. Talking to Buck at a tour, Treasure Forest tour on Roy Jordan's place, and Buck was there.
You know, while we're talking about individuals who have contributed, I'm reminded of an article I wrote recently about the Treasure Forest program, and I said, you know, it's kind of like a coal fire, you know. When you get them all together and set them on fire, it gives out a great deal of heat. But if you scatter them out, you know, they might go out. And so from time to time, as we interact with each other, we give each other heat and light, and then we are renewed and reinvigorated to go out and tell our neighbors about it. And that's kind of how the program works, I think. And so Buck Compton, what was President Bush #1, program Points of Light, you know? And so there are many points of light out there in Alabama illuminating what is Treasure Forest and what its contributions are and what its requirements are, and the recognition that landowners get kind of makes it visible. It's not landowners don't need it to do the job, but it makes it visible so that other landowners can see it.
The one thing that always stands out through the past few years, since this fine friend of mine got me so involved with this, I've toured a lot of Treasure Forest landowners' property. And the one thing that sticks out more than anything else, I mean, everyone is the pride. The guy that's got 40 acres, he wouldn't trade it for the guy that's got 4,000 acres. And that is so evident, Bill, in everyone that I've gone to. But you know, that didn't just happen.
Well, it didn't just happen.
And that was because of the criteria that some people set for this Treasure Forest.
I think that's absolutely right. It gave form to what landowners felt needed to be done and recognized them for being good stewards. But as far as pride in their Treasure Forest is concerned, I've not seen an equal to Gary Fortenberry, Dan.
You're absolutely right. And to fortify what you're saying, I was on one of the teams of judges that were going around looking for the outstanding Treasure Forest landowner in the state of Alabama. We had already visited those that had been nominated, and we had one more to go. And I told the members of our team, I said, you know, I really don't feel comfortable with what we have been exposed to thus far. I said, maybe today will be our salvation. And guess where we wound up? We flew into York, Alabama, and wound up at Gary and Shirley Fortenberry's place. And all I could say after that day was over.
It's over.
Thank you, Lord. Thank
you. The search is over.
Amen.
Amen.
Because he led us to somebody that we could admire and respect and appreciate the relationship that he had with that Treasure Forest. And we needed to have him illuminate others and share with them the sentiments that he felt about the relationship he had with what was located right there in his home county.
Dan,
Yes, sir.
you believe the Lord is pleased with the Treasure Forest program?
I believe that when a Treasure Forest landowner goes home, he's going to look down and smile at him and say, well done.
My good and faithful servant.
Touche.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's exactly right. I think the Lord is pleased with it because we are stewards. You know, he provided all this for us, and we are stewards. And so he's happy when we take care of the resources that he's provided for us because it makes contributions to other people, you know, to make contributions to future generations. One of the mottos of the Alabama Forest Commission when I was there that we devised, making Alabama better for people through forestry. That was kind of in the back of my mind as Treasure Forest was born because what we were trying to do is to make Alabama better for people through forestry. That meant all of the resources would be there to contribute.
You might remember, no, you probably won't because I didn't really emphasize it strong enough. But right after Shirley and I won the Helene Moody State Award, and I got involved enough to know what the program was. You don't really know what the program's all about until you've won that award, and then you're thrown with the Dan James and the James Hughes and the Barnett Kings, and then you really, like you're talking about, you get that internet, and you're sensitive to what the program's really all about. You know, but you read and you think you know.
Codes come together.
You don't really know. And when I found out what the program was doing and the type of people that was involved in this program, and the environmentalists were killing us. We were getting all kind of bad publicity. And I went to you. I said, Bill, invite these reporters to come on a Treasure Forest tour. There's no way that they could write anything negative about the Treasure Forest program and what we're doing. You remember me telling you that? And we finally got 2 or 3 to go.
That's right.
And then now, and we've still got some now that are strong advocate for us now, if you notice.
Sure.
But all they had to do was to go and see what we knew.
You know, we converted some environmentalists.
You certainly did.
As a matter of fact, we have environmentalists now who support the Treasure Forest program. They haven't sold out on the environment because it's a program that protects the environment. And so, you know, all across the nation, you know, we had a battle not only in Alabama with the environmentalists, but there was a battle raging throughout the nation, similar to what I described a while ago. And this program, after it was going in Alabama for several years, Bob Lentz, who was the State and Private Forestry Director over in Atlanta with the U.S. Forest Service, and I began to interact. And we talked about taking this program nationwide. And so we put together a proposal and started with the Southern Group of State Foresters. And my fellow Southern State Foresters, I'm not going to put them down. but their only hang-up was Treasure Forest was born in Alabama, so they're going to have to call it something else before it could go to Georgia or wherever it was. I'm not sure Georgia was this ilk, but most of them felt that it needed to have another name. Bob Lentz was a key person in the evolution of this thing, I suppose you'd say, from a national to from a state to a national program. And so we presented this concept to the Southern Group of State Foresters. Southern Group of State Foresters then became advocates of the program and took it to the U.S. Forest Service in Washington. U.S. Forest Service in Washington was kind of similar to the forester profession that I talked about earlier. Their main desire was to grow trees, and they felt like that we didn't need to appropriate money for anything other than growing trees. And so they nixed the proposal in the beginning, but Southern Group of State Foresters, to their credit, continued to push, and Bob Lentz, to his credit, continued to push, and several of us state foresters were committed to it from the South. And so after a while, it began to take hold and became a national program. And today, in any state in the nation, you'll find treasure forest landowners by whatever name. It's either stewardship forest or treasure forest, but it is treasure forest by our definition.
I think it's on national. If you remember the address that President Bush made a little while back, he was talking about our treasured forest. So we've already got a cotton bird up there in Washington, D.C. Did you see that?
Yeah, he didn't know it, did he?
He
Might have known it.
Sure he did. That's why he said he just forgot to mention your name, but still, it's on national television.
One of the characteristics that Bob Lentz always exhibited to me was this. He related to our Treasure Forest program as though it was a vocation rather than an occupation that he was involved in. His heart was in it.
Absolutely.
In other words, it wasn't as though this is my job, this is what I must do, this is what I love, this is what I will revel in.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that feature.
Yes,
and that
he sure did.
characteristic.
As a matter of fact, one of my great compliments of individuals as I go along life has been, that's a great American. And Bob Lentz is a great American.
Yes.
You know, as we talked about this a while ago, and one of the highlights of my life as I went along with Treasure Forest is, after several years Treasure Forest had been in business, I was invited to Washington, D.C. to help redefine the tree farm program so that it met the requirements of Treasure Forest, or I don't know that they said met the requirement, but it was similar to the Treasure Forest, and they did redefine it. And so today, if you see a tree farm program, it's the landowner can take just as much pride, it seems to me, as if it were a Treasure Forest program. So we didn't just not only do it through Treasure Forest and Stewardship Forest, I think, and you know, it may sound like reaching, but I believe we may have had a little bit to do with tree farm broadening and redefining it.
Bill, I don't remember when it was, but it wasn't that far back, and I think it's the area that you're talking about when they changed their logo. You know, their logo was trees.
Mm-hmm.
Exclusively.
That's right. And then when you made that suggestion to them, I can't remember the year, but I know that I had to get a new sign.
And it had a border.
Right.
And on 4 sides.
Right.
It represented the basic concepts of Treasure Forest.
Absolutely.
Recreation and wildlife. It all came into being.
Sure
Well,
did.
see now,
But
you've just given me some news, because I've been out of Forestry for several years.
Well, you ought to see it. You'd be
and
proud of it.
Would
it, Dan?
I haven't seen one of those tree farms.
Oh, it's pretty.
But what I do know is I knew that they had redefined it, and that they
sure
were
did.
going for the entire range of forest management responsibilities, forest resources management. And so I'm proud to hear of their new sign.
And I owe you an apology, Mr. Bill. On that morning, when you and I saw each other at the airport, and you said, Dan James, where are you going? And I said, I've got an important job to do today, Mr. Bill. He said, well, just come on, go to Washington with me. I said, no, sir, I got something more important to do today than that. I've got to find a Helene Mosley winner for the state of Alabama. So I apologize, because the impact that you had in Washington that day is still going on.
I hope that was the day you found Gary Fortenberry's forest.
Exactly right.
Hey, you know, one of the dangers that you have by mentioning people is that you leave other people unmentioned. And there have been so many key folks contributing until you wouldn't want to begin to name folk, you know, that had a key impact. And so I've named a few, but I apologize to all those who are unnamed who made equally great contributions.
Well, you're talking about your naming names, and like you say, it's always hard to remember all the names, and it's no secret how the Treasure Forest Association feels about you. And Dan and I, was on this board at the time that they wanted to come up with the Bill Moody Award. And we said that was going to be the Hall of Fame. You had to be somebody special to receive the Bill Moody Award. And we felt like that this wasn't something that you could do in a year. This was kind of like a Lifetime Achievement Award. And I was real pleased to hear you name some names, because Mr. Kelly Mosley, as you remember, Dan alluded to the fact that he presented to Buck, because Mr. Kelly, what, 96 or 98 this time, couldn't make it. And then the next person to get that award was Jerry Johnson. And you've mentioned Jerry as being very instrumental.
Jerry, one of the stalwarts in
And
that
then
program.
the other one who has this Bill Moody Award is Larkin Wade.
Is that right?
And I didn't know whether you knew that or not. And you've mentioned him as being a very important player in this. And then we have another one whom that you're very aware of, because you made the presentation, was our present state forester, Tim Boyce. And without him carrying the banner after you retired, then it would never have made it.
That's
and we had Tim. And then another one that we had was one that you groomed and maneuvered, was Steve Guy. And
Nobody grooms and maneuvers Steve. He's a free spirit.
Let me put it another way. What you did with Steve, you said, Steve, I want this done. Now make it happen. So that's what you
now
did.
Now he do that.
And Steve was the recipient of that. And then
and he's in a key position with Alpha out there to help.
Steve is also, I don't know whether you realize this or not, but Steve got certified. His place got certified last year.
Yes, it was.
And he's just like all the rest of them. That pride still shows. And this past year, I had the privilege of presenting that award to a very close friend, Dan and Romelita, James. And these people are people that I feel so good that they received this award, because I was on the committee to help select some of these people. And I want to thank that from you mentioning them in our little chat, that these people meet with your approval, because your name is a very, I don't know, my vocabulary is limited, honored name in this field of treasure forest. But these are the people that at this point has received the Bill Moody Award.
You know, Gary, I've gotten awards in Washington, D.C. and various other, I'm not bragging here, but I'm just saying to put it in kind of perspective. I've gotten awards all over, and many different kinds of awards, National Association, State Forest, those kind of things. No activity is more satisfying and pleasing to me than to know that the Bill Moody Award exists, and that people such as you have described are selected, because now forever intermingled with my name are those names as we float in the ether around Alabama and make Alabama better for future generations. And so, as a, you know, you'd be less than human if you didn't take some pride and satisfaction in such a thing as that.
I'm gonna tell you one other little war story, and I know this is going to be hard for you to believe. And it's a miracle, and I've got it marked down on my calendar. When I made that presentation to Dan and Romelita, James, it's the first time, and I don't know how many years, that I've seen this man speechless.
I wish I'd have been there.
All he could say was thank you. Tears running down his eyes. He gets everybody crying, you know. Now, that's how much that award means to people, Bill.
You're going to keep messing around, you're going to make me cry.
In all sincerity, that has been the most prestigious presentation I ever received in my life. I was truly awed.
No person who has received that award was more deserving than Dan James, because I remember from the beginning his contributions to this program, and so I'm proud to be associated with Dan in this new way.
One thing that really stands out in my mind is the fact that you, as a facilitator, were able to bring these various and sundry agencies that might have been at odds with each other for these many years, to show each of them that they had a vested interest in these landowners. They could help be successful in accomplishing their objectives by catering to them. And these landowners became recipients of a windfall of talented, well-educated, experienced people to bring all these resources to them to help them obtain their objectives.
See, there again, you said you as a facilitator did that, but as a matter of fact, I went to the Treasury Forest Planning, the Alabama Forestry Planning Committee with a concept, and they helped define the program so that it did all those things you talked about. So the program became defined so that it did all those things and met the needs of forest landowners in Alabama. Yes. One of the things that you triggered me on is what's happened since I have retired. Now, I don't remember when I retired, but it was several years ago. Let's see now. About 9 years ago, I believe, 10 years ago. But anyhow, since then, I hear bits and pieces of trade. I've withdrawn kind of from forestry and gone to church work and grandchildren and all that kind of stuff, but I do hear, I read the magazine and hear from forestry. You get the Treasury Forest Landowners magazine, that kind of thing. Treasury Forest magazine. And I do see that the program is really ginning up and continuing to do great things. And we've talked about everybody who makes key contribution to this, except the Alabama Forestry Commission. You know, I wanted to give special recognition to the Alabama Forestry Commission because they carried the load, you know, in the field and all that kind of stuff for all those years. And they started out, the people in the Forestry Commission started out with the same mindset as others in forestry back during those days, and it took a while to sell them on this idea. But since that time, along with the other agents, I'm not trying to take away from them, I'm just trying to amplify and add to the visibility of the Forestry Commission because they have been the primary load carriers, at least they were when I was there. And so I think that since I've retired, Tim Boyce, who is currently the state forester, has had a great commitment to this, and working through his organization and through others in the Alabama Forestry Planning Committee, the program continues to make great progress. As a matter of fact, the Forestry Planning Committee has been redefined. It was while I was here, I believe, while I was still state forester. It is now including people other than government agents. It includes industry folks like the Forestry Association and some of those kind of folks. It hasn't detracted from the benefits of Treasury Forest, and they haven't tried to redefine the programs. And so everybody has come along, and the Treasury Forest, the Alabama Forestry Planning Committee is still key, and the Forestry Commission is still key, and the people out there doing the work are still key, whether they were the Forestry Commission or Soil Conservation or Extension.
Yeah, I don't know whether you knew it or not, but you're talking about how they've incorporated. James Malone was the past chair of that Forestry Planning Committee, and he, of course, is executive director of the Alabama Treasury Forest Association. Association
is what I was trying to think of, yes, like the Treasury Forest Association.
So Treasury Forest is...
So he owes his job to that organization.
You know, several years ago, Mr. Boyce thought well of having me to go and make a presentation to a group in Nebraska City, Nebraska, at a meeting called the Circle of Stewards. U.S. Forest Service played a major role in this gathering of the clan from all over the United States. And there were 4 of us. I was representing the Southeast, someone else from the Northeast, someone from the Northwest, some from the Southwest. And of course I boned up on it, I really did. I wanted to do a good job. Met some more wonderful forest landowners from all over America, and became very dear friends with them as a result of it. But when we finished, there was one gentleman who was charged with the responsibility of writing up a brief synopsis of what was said and done. And I was rather honored that he decided to refer to me as being that missionary from Alabama.
That's great. That's great.
Well described, I might say. Wouldn't you say, Gary?
Oh, yes, sir. I think it's very appropriate. I think it's very appropriate.
Missionary of the Lord and Treasure Forest.
There you go. In that order. In that order.
Amen.
In that order.
Well, Dan, you had to come up with something else because I have run out.
Gary hadn't about run out yet.
Yeah,
This
Gary's
is a man
out.
that just bubbles and overflows
Gary's
with
about
fresh new thoughts and ideas.
Gary's about out just like I am because that fire is getting
That's
hot.
getting warm. I think it's time for a break.
Ah.
We'll break.